Good morning, y'all. I hope you're having a great morning this morning. Rick here, GM Rick, and it's another GM Tips. This GM Tips, we're going to talk about dun 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 player characters as rulers. Yes, with the new Kingmaker coming out from Paizo and going on to a video game, I thought this would be a great topic for just anything, any system again. It's system agnostic. But I'm going to hit a lot of different points that can be used in fantasy as well as sci-fi, and I guess to an extent in the older ones like a steampunk age or a little older age. Now you can do a modern one. That's a little tougher because there's presidents and rulers of countries that are a little bit. It's a little bit more difficult in the modern age to get into that role. So a lot of characters and players haven't even thought about, I want my own kingdom. Now, some of them do, and you may have gotten a couple of requests as a GM that I want to build up my kingdom from scratch, or I want to inherit a kingdom, or I want to buy a kingdom, or I want to rise up and become a ruler of a kingdom. How do you as a GM deal with that type of campaign? Now, some of you have run them, and you'll have a lot of great tips to share. Excuse me. Something in my tooth. I hate that after I eat. You're gonna sit down and have to think about, am I prepared to do this? And those of you that have run that type of campaign, please, 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 under my video, under the places that I post this, please put your comments as well. Because there's a lot of great advice that can be shared for new GMs, DMs, as well as older GMs and DMs who've been around a while but just haven't gone that avenue. And there's a lot to think about. Fortunately, a lot of systems are great for role play, but not great for kingdom building. They're really not. And there's a handful. Now, Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 had some books that were great for kingdom building, but really 5e, I haven't seen a lot of information on building a kingdom from scratch. Now, there's a lot of great, it's expanding, and I think eventually they'll address this, and hopefully if some of you guys are creators for the Dungeons & Dragons title and Wizards, you guys will think about this, because I think not only there, but in campaigns like Numenera, in campaigns like Cypher Systems, Savage Worlds, Fate, Open Legend, GURPS, we've got to address the campaign issues. And if you leave it open to your players to just do it and your GMs to do it out of their rear ends, as I say, you're not going to have much success. There's going to be a lot of fiascos that go on. There has to be a set of mechanics that you set up. And I'm not heavy on mechanics, believe me. But there is a process for building a kingdom. A character can't just step in and say, I want a kingdom, and there it magically appears. It's not how it works. It's not at all how it's going to work in a campaign setting. So let's take, for instance, Midgard. If you're in the realm of Midgard and you want to go to the Wasted West and you want to build a kingdom, how do you do it? How do you build a kingdom from scratch that will be a successful, long-lasting kingdom that your characters can have character after character after character after character and write history for that world? Ideas, thoughts? Yeah. So I'm going to go through some of the mechanics. Now, I'm going to take a little bit out of this path. I use materials where I know they've done kingdom stuff. So this is where they're making the actual Kingmaker after, is this path here. As you can see there, it is Kingmaker. And so I'm going to go through Kingmaker and talking about kingdoms and how do you. And I'm going to use the Ultimate Campaign. So I'm going to take the cover. I always put these protective covers on them. But the Ultimate Campaign is another resource, which you can go to Paizo's website. You can get a PDF there of it. You can buy it, or you can just look at the resources they have on the PRD or SRD if you want to go to Roll or D20 PFS. So when you look at a kingdom's mechanics, the first thing you got to do is, how is the kingdom going to support itself? If you want a character that's going to raise a kingdom out of nowhere, out of this place in the world that may be more outdoor, feral, basically woodsman style, rugged territory, how do you build a kingdom? Number one, you got to have resources. What are the resources that you need for a kingdom? Well, if you're in a space age one, it could be fuel for your spaceships. So crystals like the old Star Trek, the dilithium crystals, or whatever other types of minerals or metals you need to build the starships and to run them. You need food. People got to eat. And if you can't grow things in the environment you're in and the world you're in to support your people, the kingdom's going to fail really quick. Even with replicators. People get tired of replicators and replicator food. Now, in a fantasy setting or a steampunk setting, there's a lot of good soil that is around, but you may pick an area that doesn't have good soil to grow in. How do you get that fledgling kingdom off its feet and up to a true growing young kingdom? Does it have resources, metals, gems, precious metals, wood, oil, water for steam? Let me think what else you got. You got stone, because you're either going to build buildings out of stone or you're going to build them out of wood or metal. In some cases, if you're a more modern campaign or a post-apocalyptic campaign. So you need resources. You must have resources, number one, to begin the kingdom. You must set up a system of trade. Now, in a lot of worlds and campaigns, they've already got systems of trade and money and resources. But in some cases, like your post-apocalyptic ones, you have to almost set up that trade with things that people need. So keep in mind, you have to help the characters to understand that a kingdom just doesn't come because you want to march in and take it. You have to have the resources day to day to bring revenue to the kingdom, whether it's all internal revenue that just helps it to build up or external trade. You have to have these resources. Otherwise, your kingdom will fail and it will fall, and people will not flock to that kingdom. So if you have mines, if you have lumber consortiums, if you have industry and smithies or actual industry, industrialized plants, you got to have those kind of things, and you got to build those up. So what do you need to build up that type of a system? You need resources. Characters have to have money. They can't just start a kingdom on no money. It's tough to do. So they're going to have to put up their own money that they earn on adventures to build this kingdom from scratch. And that's kind of what Kingmaker goes into. It helps them to deal with some issues that are going on in the river kingdoms of Golarion. And it helps them to see that they've got to settle a kingdom in to kind of calm the area and become the calming resource, or almost the peacekeepers of that region. How are you going to do that? Number two, you're going to need a militia or an army to defend your kingdom. I know we like to think the kingdoms can coexist in peace. Reality is, in almost every campaign, that doesn't happen. The United Federation of Planets exists for peace, right? Barter, peace, everything else. But then there's the Klingons and the Romulans and the Gorn and all these other aliens that are going to come in and try to shake this kingdom up. By the way, I'm doing these references because Star Trek is launching a new RPG system. So those of you that are Trekkies, keep in mind, Star Trek system coming up. Go to the Paizo website. You can see it. It's going to be offered in complete campaign material. So they're going to have the Borg. They're going to have the Star Trek things, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So how do you do this? You know, I love that Amaria's Dawn is already set as a campaign area for Open Legend. But Open Legend, and Brian, my buddy, how are we going to build a kingdom if there aren't sections on that? I don't know yet. Now, see, I'm leading that I need a hardcover book. I know I could go to your website and find this out. I know. But I love my books. I'm sorry. I love my books. I can read them anywhere. I love them. I don't love reading a computer screen all the time. It drives me wonky. It makes my eyes hurt. So, you got to have that in your material. designers, creators, please, please, please come up with books that talk about kingdom building. Please. Savage Worlds, please. Fate, please. GURPS, please. All you other systems, please have at least one book devoted to developing kingdoms. Open Legend, your next book, Brian. Kingdoms. Kingdoms. All right? Monty, your next book, you and Shanna. Kingdoms. We need kingdoms. So we need that resource to be able to do that. So we talked about resources. We talked about a standing army. How do you get a standing army? Well, you got to have people that are loyal to you that believe in the same type of ideals that your characters believe in. So either a tyrannical government that marches in like the Malthunes and takes over everything. That's a reference to Pathfinder. Or maybe a dark regimen one like out of Riddick that comes in and conquers worlds and brings order. Or a peaceful federation. You got to have that, which goes to the next step. Not only a standing army and the resources to keep a standing army, you've got to have allies around you. Your kingdom alone is not going to stand the storm against 50 other kingdoms that don't like you. So there must be diplomatic relations. So you've got to help your characters to understand and your players that they've got to set up diplomatic relations with other countries. That means using skills, building diplomacy, doing trade, setting up trade deals that are maybe favorable to these nations, helping them stand against other nations that don't like them. So by becoming an ally to one, you may alienate 6 others. But that's how it is done. That is how the peace is made. And that's how things are developed. And whether you're in a Star Federation, whether you're in a steampunk world age empire where you're working with different blocks and trade blocks, or whether you're doing something in the campaigns with piracy, in the early piracy days of the early ages, the 7th Sea type of campaigns, you have to build diplomacy. Or whether you're in a fantasy realm. So keep in mind as you're doing this, okay, so now you got resources to build the kingdom. You've got to have a standing army. You got to have a diplomatic corps that goes about and talks with other nations and builds treaties. So that's going to mean skill rolls to negotiate treaties and other types of things. You've got to keep those going. And treaties don't just last once. You don't just write one treaties player and one set of treaties for everybody, and that stays that way forever. Our government right now is a perfect example. Trump walks in and says, these aren't good for our country. Boom, all these treaties are gone. That's how it works. This is how things come and go. You're maybe negotiating with another kingdom and a king or a emperor, and all of a sudden they're deposed. Now what? Now what do you do? Now you have to renegotiate everything, if they're negotiable anymore. They may see you as an enemy because you supported the former ruler. Trade routes. You have to develop trade routes. Whether they're star map routes, whether they're other type of routes, you got to develop those routes. And in that trade route, you've got to watch out because there's going to be banditry that goes on that's going to try to undermine that. So you as a kingdom have to deal with the bandit elements, whether they're star pirates, whether they're high sea pirates, whether they're brigands, whether they are an invading marauding empire or consortium. You have to deal with the elements that are going to disrupt your trade. So that's another thing. And GMs, you got to design those type of elements because they exist everywhere. And so while your players are building their fledgling empire from scratch, they need to do this. Now you say, well, when is there going to be time for adventuring? Good point. The adventures must tie into the building of the kingdom. So you as a GM, like they develop these. They develop these to have different things. And if you want a great model, get the Kingmaker series of PDFs from Paizo and take a look how they did that. They really went through and developed well to tie the adventures in such a way that it earned you rewards and points of diplomacy that allowed you to work with fellow nations and develop your own kingdom. Sometimes a kingdom has to have the backing of a larger kingdom. So your players may start out wanting their own kingdom, but unfortunately they don't have the resources and the backers. Well, say there's 3 other countries that have rivals that don't like those rivals, and your little kingdom would make a nice little buffer between them and the enemy. So, they'll help you out if you do things to help them out. And that's where the adventures come in. That's where the adventures into other places dealing with things will come in to play. Your characters have to think of a flag and a system of government. What kind of government do they want? Do they want a monarchy? Do they want a republic? Do they want a democracy? Do they want a matriarchal society? A patriarchal society? A hegemony? Do they want a religious type of plurarchy? What do they want? What kind of government do they want to instill? What taxes are they going to levy on the public? That's another thing that's got to be factored in. You got to make money for the government. I know we don't like that, and in real life, none of us like that. But it's truth. You have to think about what are you going to do, and how are you going to do it. Then you have to think about building up a main capital city. What resources going into the capital city? What kind of buildings? I love this because this gives you a set of ideas in this campaign guide. Where are they? There we go. So what Paizo has done, and I love this, because they did what all of us wanted to, okay? They have developed teams. And this again in the campaign, ultimate campaign. This is on page 104 and 105. Buildings and organizations, as well as, going back the other way, things that you may want to create for your actual rooms of your ruling castle. So basically from pages 94 all the way to pages, let's see, pages 133, they give you the tools and the costs and a system of costs of resources or gold pieces, whether you want to pay money or resources, to get said organizations, buildings, and other things up and going. You need the same thing for a steampunk type of deal. So you can convert this to a steampunk era and add new buildings. This becomes your building block. Or you can do it for a star imperium. So now you convert all this over, which may be coming in the new Starfinder that we see coming out from Paizo. Again, there's a lot of things going on that you need to do and figure out for your capital city. How many smithies do you want? How many people do you want to bring in? Do you help set people up? Do you finance people to get going, to get your capital city up and running? You've got to have a powerful capital. If you don't have a powerful capital, from there the rest of your cities won't develop. Is each of your characters going to own a city in that empire? So basically, each character runs a city within the empire. Who's their captain of the guard? Who's their sheriff? How do they police things? How do they deal with things? That's all got to be worked out with them. And that's something that we as GMs have to facilitate that. We've got to be on our A game to facilitate that. What type of religions or non-religions do you want in your empire? How does your empire view sexuality? Are they open to whatever people's sexuality are? Some GMs don't like that, and so you're going to give them a much more rigid structure and say, no, man, woman, woman, man. Okay? And I know people go, why are you bringing this into gaming? Because that's building an empire. Okay? Some empires are very tolerant of everything. Other empires are angry because of that tolerance. And they'll come marching in and try to destroy you because they see you as an abomination to the very core thinking of their ideals. Maybe they don't allow the interspecies relations. So a lizard person can't be with a human. Or a dragon can't be with a human. Or a dragon can't be with an elf. So you've got to look into those kind of things. What kind of laws? What code of laws will be set down? So you have to set out a codex of laws. What kind of liberties will be set for your citizens? Is it a feudal society? Is it a controlled society? Is it a communal society? Is it a socialistic society? Is it a capitalistic society? Is it run by corporations? Look at Dark Matter, perfect example, as a series that's run by corporations and corporate strongholds. You have to look at what is the structure. And so it's going to take you guys some time as GMs to really think about your campaign and your world in order to help them to build their own country that they're going to want to run, or star system, or planet, or colony. You have to look at that and say, what is going to be the dictates of it? And then also, finally, how do you deal with the disasters that come along? An asteroid hit, a volcano erupts, earthquakes roll through the land, radiation storms, other types of things come in and begin to edge away at your population. How do you deal with the disasters? And you've got to get your players to do that. And you, as a GM, have to create situations where disasters can occur, because they will. Societies don't just plod along and never have a disaster. That's not a real system. Disasters happen. Enemies come in and crush cities, or star systems, or planets, or space stations, or trade routes. How do you deal with the disaster of that? That's something you've got to instill in your players. They're going to have to look at that. So, much more complicated campaign, yes, much. Rewarding, of course. Your players are writing themselves into a history of your campaign. So, much more so than just being heroes. They are writing in a country. And that has much more significant impact than, say, stopping an evil villain. And maybe that's part of what they do as their new country. They're thwarting the villainous empires and the organizations that would destroy the foundations, or they're the uprise of that. And they're the thing that shake the foundations of your society into nothingness. You see where this goes? I discuss these overall concepts because we can take deeper dives into them. But I think this is the framework you have to look at as a GM to build this. Every player loves to run a set of adventures, or a set of tasks they have to do. But there's something about building a country, or an empire, or a planet from scratch that has a huge flavor to it, that takes you to another level of role playing that you don't get in a campaign setting. I had some players that kind of hinted at that, and I may tease a little more of that with Osirian, and the players making their own little conclave within Osirian. Maybe they set up their own little conclave. How will the Osirian government deal with them? Maybe they set up their own following, or their own organization, or their own little part of Osirian to rule. Or maybe they carve it out of another empire. See, some of you are so sacrosanct that you don't let them modify your world. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you let them dice it up a little bit and turn it into something unique? Because that's an experience that will help you as a GM and your players to grow to another level. You really do take it there. And I think for any GM, that's a rewarding, or DM, that's a rewarding experience. And it takes you, and DMs, this was what takes you to a GM status. Forgive me. Stuff like this takes you above being a dungeon master. Even though I love the term coined by wizards, I agree with many others. Dungeon master covers somebody who runs a set of adventures. Game master is somebody who does it all. And so, don't you want to be a game master and do it all? There's something about that that's appealing for most of us. Some of us maybe not, and that's fine. But I'm addressing those of you that do want this type of thing. All right, so another GM tips down. I'm going to be wrapping down. You probably are not going to hear from me. I'm going on break for a little while, and again, you guys will probably not see it. This is probably going to be posted later, but maybe not. I might post this today just for kicks and giggles. I would love to do a series of shows where I have other DMs and GMs and writers and authors on, kind of like Nerdarchy and Critical Role does with some of theirs, with the after Critical Role type of things. I would love to do the same thing with those of you out there. So if you want to collaborate on that and do something like that with me, because some of you have suggested, Rick, I would love to see you bring guests on your show. Okay, let's do that then. But I'm going to have to figure out how's a good way of doing it. So I'm going to need some collaborative help on that. Email me at RICMOH43, or excuse me, at 45 at gmail.com. So RICMOH45 at gmail.com or RICMOH43 at yahoo.com. I'll get your emails either way. Let's talk about this, because I would love to do that. I'd love to bring some of you on that are my watchers and maybe have a back and forth type of Q&A session or discussion on a topic. That would be a lot of fun. It doesn't have to be just people who are established in the industry. I want to rise some of you up that are in the same ranks as me, and let's talk about things, and let's really hit the heart of it. So thanks again for watching. I hope you have a great week, and go forth and have some great games.